One of the big reasons why working at Westmont for me is so sweet and so fun and so worthwhile is Jane Higa. She's our Vice President for Student Life. And frankly, I look back on how God called me to this college. I wasn't sure at all that I was supposed to come. It was a very difficult decision about 9 years ago. But I have to say it was conversations I had with Jane Higa that kept the door cracked open for God to eventually call me here. Jane, you are a terrific person and a great friend. And Westmont's had you about 20-plus years now. So you started when you were 14, I think, and just kidding. But Jane, we're so glad to have you here. May God bless you as you share with us the message he's given you. Let's welcome our Dean of Student Life.
Well, good morning. You know, it has been 20 years plus that I have been Dean of Students, your dean here. And somehow, chapel is still a nervous thing for me to do. So as I was getting ready for this and trying to summon up my courage, I just found myself trying to see how can I do chapel in a new way. So I went to Ben, you know, he's my great person for advice and wisdom. And he said, Jane, just think of chapel as an energetic conversation. Well, I know I like having conversations, but I usually think of them as, you know, I actually like conversations with one or two people the best. So, you know, you're a little bigger to have a conversation with, but there is something about that I have been trying to do and to think about as I've been preparing. And for those of you from Hawaii, you would know this phrase, because my dad, who was such a Hawaii guy, would say, hey, Jane, just go and talk story. And that is what I am coming to do today. Many of you know that I lost my husband of almost 30 years, 3.5 years ago now. And in that time, you know, when you have that kind of loss, there is something that happens to you. And I would say, as I look back on those years, the years since he died, that it's been a really sweet and sacred journey. And there's something that happens when you are forced to yield to God. And I think we all know that we're supposed to live yielded lives, and I absolutely knew that I was supposed to be living a yielded life. But there's something that happens when something like that, you know, just is an intrusion into your life that you never had anticipated. He was just 53 years old, and he had a massive stroke. So although he lived 1 week after his stroke, it was a pretty sudden adjustment that I needed to make. But in the process of knowing that God is God and I am not, there has been a very sweet journey of intimacy with God that I had not known before. Well, all of us who were here last year, whether it was those of you in preview day last year and those of you that are returning students and were on campus, experienced two fires last year, the Tea Fire and the Jesucita Fire. And when I think about those fires, you all needed to yield to God. Something so big and powerful that was so out of our control came and swept this campus. And I think that there was something that happened to all of us in that process of needing to learn to yield. Others of you have had all kinds of other times that you've had to yield, whether that is a divorce of a parent, of your parents, the loss of a friend, of a parent, of a family member, breakup in a relationship. Maybe it's an eating disorder that just is out of control. Or maybe it's the loss of the dream of playing college athletics. There are times that we just have to yield, and it's never easy when that happens. So when I look back on my last year, I would say that it was, again, one more time that I had to yield. There was the fire, there was the tremendous amount of work that then resulted after the fire, and there was a weariness that just began to set in. Things just felt so different. And I think that those of you who were here can understand that because everything felt different for all of us that were here in this community. I also lost 2 friends last spring, and 2 friends that died too young. And it again was that time of feeling like I just had to yield, that this was something bigger than anything I had had to experience again. And I think it throws me back to the last time that I had to yield. So my year ended feeling very tired and very exhausted, and in many ways feeling very distant from God and not being sure exactly how to quiet my heart again to be able to hear his voice. And in so many ways, I remember telling my good campus pastor, Ben, that I just felt like I knew that I should get up and I should, journal again. My journaling is often my praying, and I just knew that that was something that if I were to do, I could, that God would meet me. I knew he would meet me if I would just step aside, but I just couldn't. I don't know what happens when this out of kilter. I just felt like I was not, I lost my center, I lost my rhythm. I didn't know how to regain it. So I couldn't journal, I couldn't pray, I couldn't read scripture, and my mind was just filled with so much noise. And in many ways, I thought I was doing all right, except for this one piece in my life. And so it was just one of those times when I had to just kind of keep thinking, well, why don't I do this? Why don't I just take some time with God? Well, summer came, and, well, of course, at the end of the year, we had our second fire. And I remember a couple weeks to the end of the year, and I heard you as students saying that too, if we can just hold on, we'll make it to the end. It was one of those years that we all knew we were exhausted. We all knew we needed a break, and we didn't know if we were going to make it. And then what happens? Another fire and another evacuation of the campus. Now, one thing I want you all to know, and I've been telling Gail Beebe this because, he hasn't been here as long as I have been here, but in my 20 years at Westmont, we've only evacuated the campus twice. And it was last year. I mean, how does this happen? So for those of you who think that this happens every year, and maybe twice a year, no, it doesn't. But for whatever reason, last year, we had 2 fires. So there is something so I entered the summer kind of just feeling exhausted and spent, and as though God was very far away. So over the summer, we began, we were just doing our work. And part of what I find as I look back on this period of time in my life, it happens in just everyday kinds of things. We were having a meeting, Stu Kleek, Ben Patterson, and I, and planning a retreat that we were going to have for the Dean's Council, which is the folks that report to me. And Stu happened to mention that there was this wonderful poem by a guy named Wendell Berry. And he said there's just something about it that really spoke to him, and it so richly spoke to me, talking about we can work and we can toil and we can do so much, work so hard at something, but in the end it is God's grace that does the work, and it often happens while we're asleep, when we are totally unaware that God is at work in our lives. Well, Ben just happened to mention, oh yeah, that poem is in a book called A Timbered Choir. And it's a collection of Sabbath poems by Wendell Berry. Well, I'm not a poetry person. I don't have a poet that I love. But for whatever reason, I just felt like I got to get that book. I want to get that book. And so I ordered it through the bookstore, and the Timbered Choir came. Well, I started reading these poems when Scripture was still very distant from me. And I was loving these poems. They were just amazing. And I remember I went to Ben again. I said, Ben, is it okay that these poems are meaningful to me, but Scripture still isn't? And I said, is there something wrong there? I have to always check these things out. And Ben said, Jane, Wendell Berry is so steeped in Scripture that it's okay.